All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a deep dive into an issue that sits smack in the middle of ancient art, global empire, and modern justice. We are looking at the incredible legacy of the Kingdom of Benin. And to really anchor our understanding of why this whole thing matters so much today, we're going to kick things off with a pretty famous pop culture moment.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price, or did they take it like they took everything else? Now, if you've seen the 2018 movie Black Panther, you definitely recognize those words. They're spoken by Eric Killmonger, standing inside a fictional British museum, totally confronting a curator about African artifacts. And what's absolutely fascinating here is that this fictional movie scene perfectly captures a very real, ongoing controversy surrounding Western museums and the looted artifacts we collectively call the Benin Bronzes.
But hey, before we get into the violent history of how these items were actually taken, we really need to clarify what they are. Because the term Benin Bronzes is actually a massive misnomer for the roughly 10,000 looted artifacts we're talking about today. Scientific analysis has shown that these absolute masterpieces of metallurgy are primarily made of copper alloy and brass, not bronze. In fact, many were cast using melted-down brass rings from the Rhineland in Germany, which Portuguese merchants traded for local goods. It's like a giant global puzzle, even back then.
Part 1. The Rise of Great Benin.
To really understand why these artifacts are so crucial, we have to realize that this empire was an absolute powerhouse in West Africa. Growing out of early Edo settlements, originally known as Igodomigodo around the 11th and 12th centuries, the Kingdom of Benin hit this golden age of prosperity. By 1440, a ruler named Oba Ewuare the Great came into power and just vastly expanded the empire's borders. And then, moving into the 16th century under Oba Ewuare, Benin gained massive political strength. They were trading extensively across the interior and eventually with Europeans. We're talking a true cultural and economic peak here.
And to give you a sense of the sheer massive physical footprint of that golden age, just consider this number for a second. 16,000. That's a number of kilometers spanning an incredible rural network of earthen walls and moats built by the Edo people around Benin City and its surrounding settlements. 16,000 kilometers.
Let's build on that with another absolutely staggering number, 150 million. Historical sources estimate that this massive defensive structure took roughly 150 million man-hours to dig. Let me put that into perspective for you. That is 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. It consumed 100 times more material than the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're talking about what is perhaps the largest single archaeological phenomenon on the planet. This was, without a doubt, a highly advanced, highly organized society.
Part 2, Masters of Metal.
So within those massive walls, the royal palace of the Oba wasn't just a residence, it was a stunning visual archive. The royal courts commissioned these magnificent brass wall plaques detailing military victories, trade, and court life. They crafted incredibly lifelike heads of Obas, which are kings, and Yobas, or queen mothers. They had these intricately carved elephant ivory tusks and beautiful ceremonial belts, bells, and statues of leopards, which were the revered totem of the king. You have to understand, these weren't just pretty decorations. They were literally the physical, historical records of the entire empire.
Now, this brings us to a major historical bias that we really need to debunk right now. Later European curators were so stunned by the sophisticated quality of this metalwork that they just assumed, well, Portuguese merchants must have taught the Edo people how to cast metal when they arrived in the late 1400s. But the historical reality? Completely different. Indigenous metal casting actually dates back to the 13th century under Oba Ewuare. That predates Portuguese arrival by centuries. The Edo people were already absolute masters of this craft entirely on their own.
Part 3. The 1897 Punitive Expedition.
Okay, so how did all these brilliant, centuries-old artifacts end up scattered across Europe? Well, let's track the rapid, violent escalation in the late 19th century. British colonial expansion was severely clashing with the Oba's strict control over local trade. In 1892, a British vice consul named Henry Galway got Oba Ovonramwen to sign a trade treaty. Tensions simmered for a few years until January 1897, when a British official, James Phillips, led an expedition to Benin that was tragically ambushed. Just a month later, Britain launched a devastating military response, the Punitive Expedition, completely destroying Benin City. By August, the Oba had surrendered and was exiled. To really get this, we have to look at the competing historical narratives behind the invasion. Publicly, the British cited humanitarian reasons. They claimed they needed to enforce that 1892 treaty and put a stop to local practices they called juju, or human sacrifices. But, and this is a big but, internal colonial letters between British administrators reveal a massive, overarching economic drive. The British desperately wanted control over the highly lucrative local trade of palm kernels, ivory, and rubber. And the Oba? He was viewed as a huge obstacle to that economic control.
Here is exactly how this powder keg went off. Step 1. James Phillips leads an unauthorized armed expedition toward Benin right in the middle of a sacred Edo festival when the Oba wasn't even allowed to receive foreigners. Step 2. Despite clear warnings to turn back, he keeps going, and Edo generals independently ambush his party. Step 3. In immediate, overwhelming retaliation, Britain launches a massive 1,400-man punitive expedition. And finally, Step 4. Benin City is brutally bombarded, torched, and just completely destroyed. Sacred sites were desecrated, and literally centuries of architectural wonder were leveled to the ground.
Part 4. Justifying the loot. The aftermath of this fiery destruction is where the story takes a highly organized, very dark turn. 10,000. That is the estimated number of items the British forces systematically looted from the Oba's compound and the city at large. You guys, they didn't just conquer a city, they literally packed up and carried away centuries of Edo history, religious artifacts, and cultural memory. So where on earth did it all go? Well, a huge chunk was claimed by the British government, which then literally sold these priceless cultural records at auction. Why? Specifically to pay for the military expedition itself. Talk about adding insult to injury. Hundreds of plaques were accessioned directly into the British Museum and other national collections. And countless other items, they were just pocketed by individual soldiers and officers as war booty, eventually ending up on private mantles and family estates all over the West. Which brings us to a really profound modern perspective on all of this. Dan Hicks, who's a curator at the Pitt Rivers Museum, says the arrival of loot into the hands of Western curators is not some art historical incident, but an enduring brutality. He argues, pretty powerfully I might add, that displaying these items isn't just about some neutral art appreciation. For many historians today, maintaining possession of these looted objects is the ongoing daily continuation of that original colonial violence.
Part 5. The push for return. Let's look at how the push to reclaim these artifacts has evolved. Oba Ovonramwen, the king who was deposed, actually died in exile in 1914. But the push for return, it started way earlier than you might think. Back in 1936, Oba Ewuare II made the very first formal request to the British Museum for the return of their royal items. For decades, progress was painfully slow, but look at the recent momentum. In 2021, institutions in Germany and Scotland announced formal legal decisions to restitute the artifacts they hold. And by late 2022, Germany actually returned 21 bronzes directly to Nigeria.
To truly grasp why this matters so deeply, we need to listen to the Edo people themselves. Prince Gregory Akinzuwa, a great-grandson of the exiled Oba, put it like this: "The artwork can be said to represent the history of the Benin people for centuries. It was taken from us. It was like ripping pages out of our history." For the Edo people, these aren't just beautiful museum exhibits to go look at on a Sunday. Because their history was recorded in brass and ivory rather than on paper, stealing these items was literally the equivalent of burning down their national library. So that leaves us with a lingering, provocative question to wrap up this explainer. Who ultimately owns history? When the very artifacts that tell a civilization's story were acquired through violence and colonial conquest, what exactly is the moral responsibility of modern museums holding those spoils of war? Is it enough to just preserve and display them, or does true historical justice require actually giving them back? I really want you to think about that the next time you walk through a museum. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the stories behind the artifacts you see.